Hi there, BookTube. It's Roz, and it's the beginning of May. And even though I've got a couple of little People April things to still try and do as videos, I thought I'd just get in here with my May TBR before it'll become sort of too late to be worth talking about. And May is a month of multiple reading events again. Something about months that begin with an M that seems to, March and May seem to bring out more reading events than any other month. I don't know. Anyway, because I'm going to mention quite a few, I will try and sort of mention the hosts in passing and put like at least one sort of link in the description below, rather than go into loads of detail. And I'm really trying this year to use all these lovely readathons and so on there are on BookTube to get to books that I've been meaning to read, that are hanging around in my TBR or have come out recently and have really appealed to me, so rather than try and meet every prompt. And that's, I think, really paid off in my plans for May. See what you think. See if you agree whether it's paid off. But I've got, I think, a really lovely mix of lots of fiction and a bit of non-fiction and a bit of poetry and lots of new stuff and some backlist stuff and the odd classic and and things in translation. So the real Roz favourite mixture of reading, which is wonderful. I'm going to do this relatively fast, flash a few books at you as I go along, and as much as anything, I'm hoping if you read them or want to read them or want to sort of tell me I should prioritise certain ones, that would be brilliant. So it's spring here in England, which is brilliant. I love spring. I hate winter. I know some people love autumn and winter, but give me spring and summer every time. And one of the things that spring brings is Springathon. Been going for a few years now. The hosts, I'll make sure I don't miss anyone out by checking. So Heidi and Natalie and Doris and Emma, of course. And it's all about encouraging us to read non-fiction books that are about nature in some way. And I'm using this year's Springathon to, which has a prompt plant, to get myself to read Braiding Sweetgrass by Kimmerer, which is one of those books that's been around a few years that I've heard so many people enthuse about. So many people have said, Roz, you would love that book. You must read it. And I keep looking around to it. So Springathon is going to give me that extra push to do it. And Kimmerer is a botanist, and Braiding Sweetgrass is nature writing. But what she does is she is both a scientifically trained botanist, but also someone who brings her appreciation and understanding of the knowledge of plants and nature and the use of plants from her sort of indigenous heritage into her sort of scientific approach too. So it's kind of, there's a bit of memoir in there and some ideas, and sounds yummy, and I'm going to read it. I'm actually going to have it as an audiobook, so I can't wave it at you. The second book that I'm going to do that meets a Springathon prompt is another prompt is bird, and so I'm planning, presuming I have time, because it's an ambitious TBR, but if I get to do a second Springathon book, it's going to be 12 Birds to Save Your Life. And that's by Charlie Corbett. That's a newer book. It came out in 2022. I think I fancied it at the time. I picked it up as an ebook. What Corbett does, if I understand it rightly, is he writes about 12 common British birds, things that I might see in my garden here, and more about them. But then also is writing about grief and about how connecting more closely with nature can protect and restore our mental health and emotional well-being. So that sounds interesting to me, and it also happens to be a beautiful fit for another May's reading events, which is Mental Health May. You see what I mean about the M's? And the hosts for that are Kim and Marilyn Mendoza, and it's what it says on the tin. A readathon about reading books to do with mental health, whether fiction or non-fiction, and or indeed poetry. And my second mental health May choice is a book of poetry. That's Poyums by Len Pennie. It's new. It came out. The collection came out in February of this year. I've seen it recommended by a couple of people, Lindy, I think, and Willow, both booktubers whose opinion I trust. So Pennie is a Scottish author who uses some Scots dialect in the poems, which will be interesting. So again, I'm going for an audio book for that one, because I'm thinking that'll help me kind of appreciate that. But the other thing that Len Pennie's known for is as a mental health advocate, and I think that is sort of something that she brings to her poetry. So it seems a good mental health May fit. The next May reading event that I'm keen to be a part of is the Spoony Readathon, and that's hosted by my good friend Emily, and also Kat, whose channel I know less well, but I will link to. And the Spoony Readathon is about disability, reading disabled authors or books with sort of disability rep, and particularly to make sure that we try and read things that are about like all sorts of disability, and thinking about visible disabilities, but also those that are less visible. And that's a topic kind of dear to my heart. And also sort of books perhaps about being neurodivergent, which is not necessarily a disability, but is kind of, it fits in the general area, I suppose, that they're wanting us to be switched on to through our reading. And my main choice for the Spoony Readathon is Metamorphosis, A Life in Pieces. So that's a memoir, came out in 2023. It's a People April hangover. I've kind of still got memoirs in mind. And the author, let me get his name right, Robert Douglas Fairhurst. Yeah, great name that, isn't it? He's a professor of English literature who also happens to have multiple sclerosis. And this is his book. He's written various sort of interesting books about Dickens and so on, but this is his book that is more personal and more about his experience of having multiple sclerosis. But I'm reckoning that he's going to bring his sort of professor of English literature sort of sensibility to it too. So that I think that sounds like a recipe for something interesting for me. And disability representation in older fiction is always interesting to look out for, but can be problematic. Though also, it's good to see that it was always there, I suppose. And one of the books that I'm going to be finishing in May, I started it in March, I think, is Of Human Bondage by William Somerset Maugham. Now, it's known to be Maugham's most autobiographical novel, and it is really interesting that the protagonist, who's sort of the figure that is sort of seen as some, representing himself, he gives that main character, Philip, a physical disability, talipes, or what used to be called a clubfoot, and the understanding is that he does that to kind of stand in for a kind of something that he experienced himself, which was speech disfluency, stammer or stutter, really interesting that he chose to make it more visible in his character. I'm having a really interesting time reading that with a group of Shaun the Book Maniac's patrons, and I think we're aiming to finish it in May, although we may not get to talk about it till June. Now, Of Human Bondage would also fit potentially for another of the May readathons that I'm getting involved in, and that is Misery May, because certainly there's plenty of misery in Of Human Bondage. You could guess that from the title, couldn't you, if you knew nothing about the book. It's certainly about, love going wrong and struggling to kind of, I don't know, find your identity and self-awareness. Yeah. And Misery May is hosted by Scott and Jack, and two favourite booktubers of mine that, good friends in the booktube sense. And I do love a miserable book, as you must know if you follow this channel. And so I'm throwing myself wholeheartedly into Misery May. They've got a kind of one of those, what do you call them, like a matrix with boxes, to tick off. I can't remember the word. Dear, oh dear. You know what I mean. With loads of prompts on it. And I'm not going to try and do all of them, but I'm going to hit a few. Now, my first Misery May choice, I'm not sure it actually fits any of the prompts on it's not a scratch card. Oh, I can't believe I can't think of the word. Anyway, you know what I mean. This is Wandering by Tommy Orange. It came out in February or March. So it's still hot off the press in many ways. I've got it out of the library, hence the shiny cover. And it, as I say, it doesn't technically fit any of the prompts, I think, but it's described as harrowing and full of trauma. So, it certainly fits for Misery May, doesn't it? Tommy Orange is of sort of Native American background, and this book speaks to that. It's set in the present, but then incorporates sort of, I think, 7 generations of sort of trauma experienced by Indigenous Americans at the hands of colonial settlers, and how their experience of being abused through that. And but I've heard that Tommy Orange is a really good writer, and I think this is it's a second book, but you don't need to have read the first 2 and read this one, is my understanding. So I'm really looking forward to it. Now, my second Misery May choice does fit one of the prompts, because one of the prompts is to read a miserable classic. And oodles of choice there, of course, but it so happened that I planned ahead with Hannah to buddy read Portrait of a Lady by Henry James, published 1881. So, nice to get in a classic. And fits the miserable classic prompt for sure, because it's famously a book about a woman who makes a bad decision with tragic consequences, by marrying the wrong person. And I know that the buddy read with Hannah will be a joy, but the book will certainly be miserable. Now, my next Misery May book is also about an unhappy marriage, and it's Forbidden Notebook by Alba de Céspedes. She was an Italian-Cuban novelist. She wrote this, or it was published in 1952 in Italian, but this translation by Anne Goldstein came out just last year. So it's a sort of a newly available backlist book for me, only reading English. And I actually bought this copy during the BookTuber meetup book crawl in London in March, and a few people kind of recommended it to me, including I think Sarah of Hardcover Heart. So I'm definitely up for this one. If you've read it, do tell me if it should, how high on my list should it be. I'm thinking it's one I'm quite excited by. Now, one of the Misery May prompts is to read a translated miserable book, but I'm not using that one for that, because I was also very keen to read Of Cattle and Men by Ana Paula Maia. And she's a Brazilian author. This is translated by Zoe Perry. I think it's a recent translation. Might be it's fairly newly out, 2023, I think. But although she wrote it, or it was published in Portuguese in 2013. And it's a book set in a slaughterhouse, or in and around a slaughterhouse in Brazil. So you can imagine that sets you up for misery, doesn't it? And I've already started it. It's great. It is a little bloody. It's a bit grim. Comes with if you're someone who needs trigger warnings, comes with multiple trigger warnings, because essentially this is about both humans and animals being driven to murder and distress. Just my sort of thing, I'm afraid. And another of the Misery May prompts is war. And I'm always interested in books that are linked to war. And some of the most miserable wars in their sort of impact on people and on countries are civil wars. And I am planning to read with Tilly, who's my daughter, but also from Tilly's shelf, Brotherless Night, which is by V.V. Ganeshananthan. And that's, again, new book, came out in 2023. Ganeshananthan is American, but of Tamil background, from Sri Lanka, and it's a book about set in the Sri Lankan Civil War. It's on the Women's Prize shortlist, and it had enormously positive reviews by people who are doing sort of Women's Prize reading. And I've read quite a few of the Women's Prize long list and now shortlist, and this is one I hadn't yet got to that I was keen to read, and Tilly was particularly keen to get to it because she just recently read this one, The Seven Moons of Maali, Almeida by Shehan Karunarilaka, and who's a Sri Lankan author, and another book that is set in the Sri Lankan Civil War. She loved this and exhorted me to read it too. It was actually a present from me to her, so I kind of hoped I'd get it back to borrow and read. If at all possible, I will read both Brotherless Night and this in May, because I think it'll be really interesting to kind of set the two up next to each other. Not necessarily to compare them, but just, two different perspectives on the Sri Lankan Civil War. Now, if I get to this, it will also be, almost coincidentally, a rather nice fit for the Asian readathon, which is hosted by Cindy. And the theme for that in 2024, because that's been going for a while, is past lives. And this is a bit of a ghost story. The main character is a ghost, is dead, and looking back. It's complicated. I might link to Tilly's review so you can find out more about it if you fancy. But so it fits for that. But the Asian readathon is not one that I sort of really kind of particularly sort of aim to take part in. That's more of a coincidence, I suppose. My last Misery May prompt that I think I'm going to meet is the one Immigrants. And all these miserable books that I'm planning, I thought I need something that's got a bit more humour to it. And so I am going to read James by Percival Everett, which is newly out, March, I think, again. And again, it's a library book, hence, apologies for the shine on the cover. I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I haven't yet read a book by Percival Everett. I know, it's shocking, isn't it? Everyone tells me he's a brilliant author. I've got Trees and I'm meant to read it. And probably I should be reading that first. But the thing about James is, my understanding of this is that it's both harrowing and really funny, ferociously funny. I've heard it described as, we'll see. I don't find books ferociously funny, but who knows? Maybe Everett will be the one for me. It is a retelling is perhaps not exactly the right word, almost like a reimagining of Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. Can't get the words out. And from the perspective of the Twain character Jim, but who in this book is more properly known as James, the name that he would call himself when he's not, trying to sort of keep out of trouble by, pretending to not have thoughts or opinions or, and, accepting being called Jim. I have read Huckleberry Finn. I'm very curious to read this, and I hope it lives up. I hope it's not one of those books where, because everyone says Everett's so brilliant that I end up being sort of underwhelmed. Tell me what you think. Will I be? No, I'm very optimistic, and obviously James, as an enslaved person in America, is the descendant of involuntary immigrants, so it kind of fits the prompt, doesn't it? So I have to say that's probably a fairly ambitious TBR, and that's not it, because there's another thing I'm taking part in, and that's a group read of some of the works of the author Elizabeth Bowen, kind of in publication order, not everything she wrote, but a series. And this started at the very end of April, and it's continuing through May and June and just into July. And in May, we will be finishing, this is something that's organised by Sarah of Hardcover Hearts, by the way, but I'm not going to tell you loads about that because it's too late to join it. But she does a kind of deep dive thing with a group from time to time, and I really wanted to do the Bowen one because Bowen, if you don't know her, is an Anglo-Irish author that was sort of writing in the early and mid and sort of up to the sort of end of the 1960s, started in the 20s up to the 1960s. Wonderful style, polished, really acute observation. I've read about 4 of her books before, but most of the ones reading for this group read are different ones. As I say, we're going to be reading her first book, finishing it in May. That's The Hotel, which came out in 1928, I think. The next one we're going to read is one that I usually recommend to any of you. That's The Last September, which she published in 1929. Really, it's one of those books that you start out thinking you're reading one sort of book, like, sort of charming country house, sort of posh people book, and then you realise it's something a lot darker than that. And so those are the 2 that we'll be finishing in May, and then carrying on with more stuff in June and into July. Now, if I've been a bit ambitious, I'm not going to panic, because I'll allow myself to roll things over into June and beyond if I have to. And as an illustration of that, I have a few things that I've got sort of on the go this one I plan to finish in May. It's a rollover from People April. It's Normal Women by Philippa Gregory. It's big, it's fat, I'm reading it with Stephanie Cohen, the commenter, which is joy. And it's quite a bitty, it's really interesting, quite a bitty book, because it's 900 years of normal women in English history, and full of fascinating tidbits, but it doesn't have like a kind of strong narrative thread to sort of pull you along. So it's the kind of book that you shouldn't read. You don't want to read in a rush. So that's one hangover from People April. A second hangover from a book that I started as part of People April, but always intended to do slowly, is this, In Parenthesis by David Jones. It's a autobiographical novel in free verse that is about David Jones's experiences in World War I. And it's the kind of book that I like to read as a long, slow read, just a little bit at a time. So I just read just the first section in April, and we'll read one little bit each month. But I do find that kind of long, slow read kind of takes me through things successfully. I'm happy to report that I'm now more than halfway through the Iliad, which I started on the 1st of January, and I'm taking that sort of long, slow approach with that. I'm listening to one translation and reading another. So this is the Robert Fairhurst translation. I'm listening to the newer one by Emily Wilson, which is very good as an audiobook. And similarly, I'm successfully, making my way through Canterbury Tales. And it may look like I'm only halfway through, but just over halfway through, but actually the last sort of more than a third of this book is notes and index and so on. So I've actually only got one tale left, The Parson's Tale, which Tut-Lautrec and I will be reading in May and June. So that's it. Woo, bit of a marathon. Always love to hear your thoughts on any of the things that I'm planning to read. It'll help me kind of work out how I prioritise things a bit maybe, and also, love to hear about your May plans too. And if you're taking part in any of these readathons, or you think I'm completely ridiculous and I should just mood read, Ros. Someone out there is going to tell me to just mood read. It's not me. I can't help it. But I do, I suppose, which order I pick things up in, it might be mood related, to be fair. So I'm off to read a bit more.